The preservation of and increased access to the 92nd Street Y Humanities Audio Archives is generously funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities.
Good evening. My name is Robert Gilson. I direct the Art Center at the 92nd Street Y. For those of you who are unfamiliar with our programs, I'd like to refer you to the whole Y catalog available in the lobby. The summer catalog will be out in about 3 weeks, and we'll have a very active program this summer, and we hope that you will join us for some of our events. Our speaker this evening is Terry Winters. Our speaker this evening, Terry Winters, will present the final lecture of this year's Artist Vision 1 lecture series. Artist Visions 2 will conclude May 11th with Tina Barney. Peter Galassi, director of the photography department at the Museum of Modern Art, will be the moderator for that event. Our moderator this evening is, as always, Nan Rosenthal. The format for this evening will be as follows. Nan Rosenthal will introduce Terry Winters. Mr. Winters will then present a slide lecture. At the conclusion of the slide presentation, there will be a brief pause while the stage is reset up. And this will be followed by an informal discussion between Ms. Rosenthal and Mr. Winters. And then this will in turn be followed by a brief period of question and answers from the audience. If you'd like to pose a question, please write it on the index card you received upon entering the hall, and the ushers will pick them up at the conclusion of the slide presentation. And as always, your written questions are greatly appreciated and encouraged. Thank you for coming this evening, and thank you for being with us this year. Please help me to welcome Nan Rosenthal.
Thank you, Bob. I'm delighted to welcome Terry Winters to Artist Visions. Terry was born in Brooklyn in 1949 and raised there. He attended the High School of Art and Design, located way east on 57th Street in Manhattan. And from this vantage point, saw many exhibitions of 60s art at a precocious age. He received a Bachelor of Fine Arts from the Pratt Institute in 1971. Unlike a number of other artists of his generation, he elected not to show his work immediately, but to wait for it to ripen. His first one-man exhibition of paintings in New York was in 1982 at the Sonaban Gallery, where he continues to show. Early on, his work attracted the admiration of other artists, and in many ways, I think particularly in respect to his exploration of a great range of media and his technical virtuosity, his manner of making his marks palpable almost, Winters is an artist's artist. At the same time, the sensuousness of the surfaces of his work and his biomorphic forms drawn from the natural world make his work, his abstractions, accessible and open to associations on the part of the viewer. In 1986, Winters had an exhibition at the Tate Gallery in London, and in 1987, he had an exhibition at the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis, which was seen also at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston and at the University of California at Santa Barbara, which organized that exhibition. He has also had one-man exhibitions in Los Angeles, Boston, St. Louis, Cologne, Berlin, Lucerne, and Tokyo. At the moment, a superb exhibition of his work of the past decade is on view at the Whitney Museum of American Art and remains there until May 10th. Just now, Winters is also showing in a 3-person exhibition of works on paper at the Margot Levin Gallery in Los Angeles, a show of Winters, Bryce Marden, and Jasper Johns that I, for one, wish would come to New York City. Lisa Phillips, who curated Winters' show at the Whitney, observed very astutely in her catalog essay that he shares with Jasper Johns a way of making art in which the physical activity of making and the mental activity of conceiving are both directly present. I have to agree with that. Terry?
Hi. Maybe we can start with the slides. This is a slide talk, so there are going to be lots of pictures. Speaking about one's own work is a kind of confession. And what I want to confess is my involvement with painting as a practice of making pictures, and also a practice which allows me to locate and find out things about myself. So I brought slides of work from when I was still in art school to drawings that were completed just this past week. These two drawings were, in fact, completed this past week and are part of a larger group of things that are now in process in my studio. I think it's important to remember that this developmental reading tonight is really done in retrospect, because I feel that there's a danger in making the decision-making process seem more rational than it really is. I think there's also the risk of trivializing the work by presenting it as if it's an illustration of an idea. Because while I try to paint within a theoretical framework, the paintings themselves connect to thought processes which are outside the parameters of logic. I think of painting as a language perfectly capable of standing as a statement on its own. So my commentary is not meant as an explanation, but rather serves as a description of the spaces around the work itself. These are two watercolors from 1969 made while I was at Pratt Institute. Most of the work that was being shown in the galleries in New York while I was a student that I was drawn to was really sculpture. It was work that was a development out of Jackson Pollock's art in terms of its involvement with process and the literalization of the field of action painting. I'm thinking about people like Richard Serra or Eva Hess's work. And for a while I was at Pratt, I stopped making paintings and did what were then known as pieces. I remember doing a painting directly on the wall with various kinds of clays with no binder, so they would eventually fall off the wall, or pieces that involved sculptures using blocks of yeast that I would put heat lamps on and were allowed to mutate and grow. And after a while, I kind of tired, as you could well imagine, doing this kind of work, and really wanted to get back to making pictures, which is what my initial interest in going into producing art was about. So I tried to take some of the lessons and the interest that I had about and learn from the people who were involved in making process art and apply it to sheets of paper as a way of inventing images. So these two watercolors were made by applying watercolor to the sheet, sanding the sheet, folding the sheet, re-sanding it, reapplying paint, just in a very programmatic way, trying to set up a system through which an image would be produced. And what I wanted to do now is show, with about 6 slides, I think, some of my first interests of while I was still in school, things that I first learned about at that point and still really impact on the way that I think and look at things. On the left is a Robert Frank photograph of the painter Franz Kline. The abstract expressionists were really the first contemporary painters whose work I learned about. People like Kline and de Kooning and Pollock and Newman. They were all people whose just seeing their work, just seeing photographs of them in their studios was really helpful to me, since the place that I came from, no one really made paintings. And it was a way for me to locate that situation of what it was like to be a painter now, really. And I still measure the achievement of any painting I look at now by the formal achievements that those people really initiated. Robert Frank was a photographer whose book, The Americans, also had a big impact on me, and I think he was a way for me into a whole generation of American writers, the American beats, and I really learned about Allen Ginsberg and Jack Kerouac and William Burroughs through Frank's work. On the right is musical score by John Cage. And I came to Cage's writing and music through my interest in Johns and Rauschenberg. But once I got hooked on his writing, he really introduced me to a whole network of writers and artists and thinkers, people like D.T. Suzuki or Buckminster Fuller or Marshall McLuhan. He just really wove a very complicated web of people and artists and how they thought and looked at the world. I also wanted to show a bit of my interest in architecture at this point. Architecture really interested me in the way that it existed in the real world and dealt with real-world problems in a very formal and abstract way. On the left is a geodesic dome by Buckminster Fuller, and on the right is a dormitory building in India done by Louis Kahn. And these two people really defined the extremes of architecture for me that I was interested in, the futuristic and technological aspects of Fuller with the more archaic and elemental ideas that Kahn was working with. I like the way that Fuller investigated new materials and how they could be used, and on the other hand, Kahn was trying to work with very archaic, ancient materials like bricks in order to invent new forms. How can I look at these slides? These are two images that burned their way into my consciousness in 1969. All through the 60s, I was really fascinated by the images that NASA was sending back with the space program. I really was fascinated by the objects and the phenomena that appeared in all of their photographs, and also in the way in which these measuring devices were juxtaposed or superimposed over the images, much like this photograph, which is a photograph of the moon from 1964. On the right are two Indian paintings from the 17th century which are depicting sound vibrations. Tantric art and tantric diagrams were also something that I came to in the late 60s. There were a couple of shows that were done then in New York. I remember something at the Jewish Museum being done then. And we're part of a whole sort of late 60s counterculture. Maybe you can blame it on drugs and rock and roll, but it was really a way of looking towards non-Western and Eastern art. And part of my interest in all of that was the way that Eastern art was able to use both representational and abstract systems to talk about the way the world was structured. So these are two works done a couple of years after I got out of school, and they're both egg tempera on paper. They're about 48 inches high. At this point, I was really starting to try to extend that idea of process by becoming very involved in paint and paint technologies. I was starting to collect a lot of books about paints and pigments, and began to make my own paints because of my interest in egg tempera, which was a medium that whose surface characteristics and physical handling was something I wanted to explore. So I wasn't getting back to making my own paints out of some idea about getting back to nature, but really from a point of view that was about state of the art, or using the most technologically appropriate material for whatever the project was. Both of these pictures have the names of the pigments on them and a translation of the pigment name. That was one of the ways I was trying to get away from the idea of only making a field painting, because as I was just applying all these paints programmatically onto the surfaces, I wanted to get away from the idea of the self-referential, which was also a big idea then, and have the paintings allude to places outside of the work itself. These are also two egg tempera pieces from 1979, and they're part of an involvement I began at this point with a pigment called asphaltum, which is an organic pigment that occurs in a couple of geographic locations around the world. And what I've done here is I was really involved with the idea of putting on with making a very factual presentation of the paint and the paint handling. And I was mixing the asphaltum pigment with various amounts of, and a wide range of blacks and whites, applying the paint with trowels and sticks, and really much in the way that you might do a microscope slide, and just laying up the facts of the paint in terms of its physical and chemical properties. What began happening more and more for me, though, was as much as I was trying to avoid the notion of working on a field painting, I kept feeling that more and more I was, in fact, making only a field painting, and I needed to get myself back in the studio in some way, because I had been spending more and more time on research that was involved in how to produce the paintings, on actually making the paintings themselves. And I knew that there was something wrong with that whole situation. I needed to somehow reverse that. And I realized that the thing that I was really missing was drawing. And that drawing was something I did ever since I was a kid. And I really wanted to get more involved with the whole notion of making pictures again. So once I decided that it had to do with letting myself draw again, the question became, what was I going to draw? And I began to look at the things I was actually looking at that time, which were the architectural structures of a German engineer named Frei Otto, who was doing lots of research about lightweight engineering structures. He's lightweight pneumatic structures. He's most well known for his the Munich Olympic Stadium. And I did a group of drawings that were based on models that he had designed for different antennae systems. And I call these a spine group. They're 30 inches high. They're all done with casein and charcoal. And I was happy with them. I was happy in terms of the process of how I was working a lot again on them. And also, I liked the way that the drawing allowed me to complicate the space of my work, and how it also complicated my own emotional involvement in the work. The part I wasn't happy with, or I didn't like about that work, was that it was really based on somebody else's work. And I began to look towards the sources that were in my notebooks already, namely the places that the pigments themselves came from in terms of botanical or crystal growth structures. And I decided to make a painting based on those kinds of natural occurrences, since it afforded me an endless repertoire of forms to go to. And I also liked it because no one had made it before, and then whatever I ended up doing, whatever was the product of my investigation, would be necessarily something that was my own, and that was something artificial. And these are two pictures that are from a group of 3 paintings called Planes of Incidence, which try to mimic rather than represent the growth structure that occurs within this crystal. So there was an idea about self-similarity here that I was really interested in, that somehow the painting itself would be built up out of numerous applications of glazes, much in the way that thin layers of quartz would end up developing into a crystal. I've always liked the way that images can convey information about the world. Images that aren't primarily aesthetic and that come from some other sense of urgency or need. And it's something I wanted for my own work. I mean, images like graphs or maps or charts. And one of the places I went to, or one of the places I looked that I saw this occurring. This painting is upside down. Was the work of Marcel Duchamp. This upside-down painting by Marcel Duchamp is the network of stoppages from 1914, and it's really 3 paintings in one. It's a landscape that's turned on its side, which he then painted these black bands and superimposed a pencil grid and a layout of the large glass, which might be hard to see. And on top of that, this painting of the 9 capillary tubes, which he used the 3 network of stoppages to use as a template in order to draw them. And this is really one of my favorite paintings. I really like the way that Duchamp could invent these systems and then, in a very objective way, go about making his painting disappear. I don't think it really matters. The whole stance of Duchamp and the way that he said that he tried to extend the laws of physics and chemistry, and the way, I think that's the way it was meant to be. So I think yeah, that's it. That's okay. Anyway, I really like this painting. Either way, it's up. I like the quasi-scientific pose of Duchamp, and I think that he made the poetic, the fusion of poetry and science that Baudelaire really dreamed about. The other big source for me at this point was the non-Western art of indigenous peoples, because I really admired the way that they could use abstract form to describe natural forces. And on the right is a nautical map from Micronesia that was used to chart wave currents. These are 2 works from 1982 that are some of the first pieces I did using this idea of using botanical images to generate a painting. And again, it was this idea of setting up a systematic program and constructing the image rather than resorting to a conventional idea about depiction. I really wanted a kind of isometric projection of that would exist in a parallel way between what the picture alluded to and what the painting was. So I was somewhat taken aback at times that after I set up this entirely programmatic system of building the painting, I got back something that really looked like a leaf. It was a little confusing to me. I think the drawing on the right, I feel, is a bit more, for me, was a more successful union of the material and the way the material was worked and the image and how the image emerged. I wanted to go back and at this point and look at some other things that I got when I was in school. I mean, this is all sounding like I was such a good student, but I really wasn't. This was all stuff I did on my own. Because I was trying to find a way to move through this idea of looking at natural structures, and I went back and looked at Darcy Thompson. But this image on the left is from Darcy. This is your left. It's from Darcy Thompson. It's from his book on growth and form, first published in 1917. And Darcy Thompson was a biologist who applied mathematical projection to living organisms. He was really one of the first people to do that, and he was doing it at a time specifically when biologists were trying to narrow the field of biology and trying to it was really the beginning of the age of specialization, and he was trying to look at the relationships between species and across species. On the right is a photograph by the German photographer Karl Blossfeldt, who at the beginning of the century began a systematic investigation of close-up photographs of plant structures, and I was really taken with the architectural and abstract quality of these things. I just want to show a couple of photographs because of my interest in lens systems and the way that lens systems can make the invisible visible, both on a microscopic and a macroscopic way. On the left is a photograph of a protoplast taken with an electron microscope, and on the right is a photograph by Harold Edgerton done in the 50s of a splash of milk. And I like the way that instantaneous photography could freeze events and reveal their hieroglyphic structures. These are two paintings from 1982, and they show the simple way I was trying to approach laying out these structures. So I was just presenting them to myself in a way and seeing how they might occupy the space in a painting. They almost mimic a 19th century botanical illustration, and all the structures are just laid out across the plane of the picture. Nothing's going off the edge of the canvas. It's very straightforward. The color at this point also tended to function as a resonance towards where the images were coming from. They were mostly done with earth pigments. I mean, on one level for that reason, and on another because they're also the fastest drying pigments, and I was really interested in moving on, like getting things dry and trying to get more paintings done. This is a painting called Colony from 1983. And I wanted to move away from that very simple presentation of the facts and open the paintings up to a more improvisational space, really, and something that was more difficult for me to control. So this painting is one of the first of a group of pictures I'm going to show you that are a much larger format. The painting's about 6 foot by 9 foot, and so that it was just physically more difficult for me to control, and that I ended up making decisions and seeing things happening in the painting that I couldn't have predicted. I was trying to get a wider range of mark making and surface in these pictures, and place these forms within the context of a picture, and in order to see the kinds of relationships that were happening by these placements. This is a painting called Lumen, which is about 9 feet tall. A lumen is the interior of a cell, and it's also a measurement of light. This painting, Good Government, is the largest picture that I'd done up to this point. It's about 9 foot by 12 foot, and it really comes at the end of this group of almost landscape-like pictures that I was involved with at this time. And it's the only painting that I worked on for a period of about 3 months. Although I was working on drawings and prints, it was really the only place I went to work out my ideas about paintings. And for a long period of that three-month time, it really seemed like a mess to me. It never quite came together or worked. And at a certain point, the painting worked in that very cliched, formalist way. And it just looked to me like it was a chart, like those schoolroom charts of good government where all the citizens are working together to make a happy little city. And Good Government's also the name of a Lorenzetti painting I really like that's in Siena. These are 2 pages from a portfolio of lithographs that I began in 1985. In 1982, I was invited out to ULAE to work on lithographs after my first show at Sonnabend, and printmaking was something that always interested me, but I never actually made a print. And going out to ULAE was a great situation in which to learn about making prints. For about a 2-year period, I went out there almost every day, every week I went out there at least a day or 2 a week to learn about making lithographs. And I was attracted by learning about a new medium, and I always like Barnett Newman's observation that any medium in the visual arts is like a different kind of musical instrument, and each one has its own capacity for saying a very specific thing that's unique to itself. And up to this point in '85, I had published about 4 or 5 prints, and was very taken with how lithographs have the capacity to look like a drawing, but were always had the at the same time had the potential to be built like a painting, depending on the number of plates or stones and the way that you wanted to combine them. So I knew that I wanted to take on a more ambitious project in lithography, and I decided to do that over the course of a portfolio of prints, since I hadn't done that before. And these are 2 pages from the portfolio called Folio, which are 11 pages, including the title and the colophon page. So these 11 pages were printed from over 120 separate plates, which were worked on very directly at ULAE. I was making the plate there, processing it and proofing it, and then working again directly on a plate in response to what we were getting back in the proofs. And they range from very simple, relatively simple prints, like the one on the left, which is done out of 3 plates. The larger black image is the key plate, which one printing, to plates that involved nearly 15 printings, as the one on the right, and where the first plate was also the last plate, and sandwiched together all the subsequent plates. On the right is the colophon page, which is traditionally the technical sheet in a portfolio. And what I wanted to do here was mimic the drawdowns of inks that the printers were showing me whenever we were making a color decision on printing the portfolio. So these are all the colors that are, in fact, used in the printing of the portfolio. And, sometimes it took three printings to get it to look as if it were just a simple drawdown. This is a painting I was working on at the same time in my studio that I was going out to ULAE to work on that portfolio. It's called Dystopia. And I had read something by the English writer J.G. Ballard, where he said that the ultimate dystopia was the inside of one's own head. And that when I painted this painting, that really made a lot of sense to me. So it's called Dystopia. These are 2 drawings from a large group of drawings called Schema, which are also from 1985 and 86. And I had found a pile of handmade papers, 76 of them. And I had the notion that I would keep them around my studio or take them with me when I was traveling in order to, as a notational device while I was working on other projects. And when I was halfway through the stack of paper, I realized that this thing was actually a work in itself. And I, at that point, began to work on new drawings with that idea and rework older drawings with that notion in mind. And really tried to set about exploring every kind of drawing material I could, from very simple pencil drawings on the right to drawings that combined wax and oil crayons with acrylics and gouaches. It also was a way for me to explore new images of things that I hadn't used before, and introduce new kinds of spatial situations in which to situate these things that I was painting. So I sometimes reused different kinds of flotation devices that I was using in other paintings, and then also opened up the space where things were going off the edges of the drawings. Watercolor on the left, and a very heavily worked drawing on the right with oil crayon where the lines were incised with scrapers and a razor blade. And that form ended up in a much larger picture later on. This is a painting called Dumb Compass, and it's about 8 foot by 13 foot. I really like mixing, after having worked on 75 drawings that were only really a foot tall. And I just want to move back here, because one of the unique things about making paintings and drawings is the fact that you really need to experience them physically, actual size. And I think that there's a way that all the images become very homogenized by looking at them as a slide. Because I think paintings are really able to invoke thought by involving the total body in the perception of the image and what the content of the image is. And it's really one of the only places left where we can do something like that. It's really one of the most exciting things for me about what paintings are. So I was really interested in shifting my own working methods from these very small 1-foot-high drawings to paintings that were 8 feet tall. This is a painting called Dumb Compass, and a dumb compass is a compass card without a needle. And it just seemed that there were a lot of directions opening up to me at this point. And I wanted to include these two paintings to show my continued involvement with that pigment that I showed you earlier, asphaltum. And the way in which I think now those ideas about the physical and chemical properties that are peculiar to this pigment are really being pushed to a new kind of extreme for me. Both these paintings are about 6 foot by 9 foot. And they combine that aspect of the physical application of paint with these new structures that were starting to inhabit my work. There was also, hopefully, the resonance about location and geography for me. And the painting on the right is called Pitch Lake, and the Pitch Lake is a lake, an actual lake in Trinidad where asphaltum comes from. On the left, the other place it comes from is the Dead Sea in what was then called Judea, and this pigment was then called Jew's Pitch, which is what this painting is called. I was really taken with how these pictures were feeling more like pictorial inventions to me. I mean, pictorial and linguistic inventions, because I think that although the paintings are in fact paint on canvas, they're also signs that are existing in a kind of semiotic space. And all of these signs exist for me as a nascent reality in themselves. And these are, I'm going to show a few of these small gouaches from 1987. These also are about 1 foot high. And there's beginning to be an appearance of more anatomical and body images in some of these works. The piece on the left is from that series of gouaches, and I wanted to also show you a painting where that same abstract form is reworked in a much larger picture, which is about 11 foot high, called Black and White Manifold. I've been showing you fragments of lots of groups and series of works, which is it's a way that I move through projects for myself by developing these different series, and I wanted to show you one complete group of works, or one complete cycle of work. These are from a portfolio called 14 Etchings that was published in 1988. I initially had the idea of doing a group of images for an Edgar Allan Poe story that I really liked, or not a story, really an essay called Eureka, in which Poe laid out his cosmological vision of the universe, and he combined very current scientific fact, although this was written in 1847, with pure hoax and pure fantasy, and I really enjoyed the way that both of those things seem to coexist on a very equal level in Poe's work. I had a part of the reason of choosing this Poe piece was because I had found a number of years before a set of photographs of a skeleton from the head to the foot, and I was looking for an excuse to somehow use that in my work, and Poe seemed like a good excuse. After I started the project, I realized I didn't really need Poe, and I sort of dropped him. And in place of the Poe essay, I included the list of the constellations as they appear in Roget's Thesaurus. And I like the way that the 13 images of the skeleton set up the narrative of the portfolio and the sequencing of the portfolio. So there were two strains of thought that came together for me in this portfolio. I mean, one had to do with the idea of the abstract diagram and the way that it could set up a set of allusions about the world, and also this interest I had in the body itself, and the body as a paradigm of all reality. And the images for the portfolio were generated by photographs and drawings. The photographs of the skeletons were turned into photogravures, and I did a set of drawings on acetate films that were transferred to a photographic etching plate and then reworked with aquatints. That's the last plate on the right, the foot. From those small etchings, the top image in those etchings is only 8 inches high. I went to a larger painting that is 8 feet. It's 8 feet high. It's so large it won't even fit on the slide here. And this painting is called Eureka, after the Poe story. Again, trying to combine that idea about the diagram and locating these structures I was drawing within this diagrammatic space. These are two images from a group of drawings I did in May of 1989, which I think was really marked a new set of work for me, in the way that I was working in a much more spontaneous and improvisational way, both in terms of the way that I myself was generating the images and what my relationship was to some of the sources I was using for my images. And there were 12 drawings in this group, and I wanted to move away from or contrast the idea that I was using in the schema drawings of using an encyclopedic range of drawing materials and focusing on one drawing material, in this case the charcoal. So I got a lot of different kinds of charcoals, and tried to make marks that also extended the range of the kind of marks I was making. And it was really about the sweep and the gesture of my arm, rather than working on the smaller group of drawings. So these drawings are all 30 inches high, and really, physically, when you're standing in front of the real thing, you relate to it much more in terms of your own body, the viewer's own body. Another thing that I noticed was going on in those charcoal drawings, which involved a lot of symmetrical structures, were the kind of facial and figurative readings that were starting to occur in some of the images, even though those weren't things that I intended, and they weren't. I wasn't going to places to necessarily encourage those kinds of readings. And I think once you lay out any kind of symmetrical structure, you immediately get those kinds of readings with them. And I started to look at sections through different kinds of material in order to see that occurrence happening. On the left is a veneer of burlwood, and on the right is a computer section of a human head. And I began to consciously work in a way that would play off of that notion of symmetrical structures with possible facial or bodily readings. And I was interested in developing structures where that was sometimes encouraged but never really stayed there for long, that the way that the paintings were made and physically composed also deconstructed that reading, which is difficult to do in these slides, maybe. This is a drawing from 1991 and is about 4 feet high, and I think it really gets back to some of the implications for me of the charcoal drawings, and connects it with this notion I was just speaking about in terms of the figurative and narrative readings that were starting to occur in the work. There's almost a calligraphic approach to how I was trying to generate the forms at this point, that there was really a spontaneous projection on my part about how the images were produced, so that the pictures ended up being a kind of transformation of something that was in my imagination. And there really is a kind of link up between how the image is produced and how it's read that was more successful at that point. These are two images of Asian art that are separated by 300 years. On the left is a painting by Gao Yang from 1650 called Old Rocks. And I'm really interested in making unique and irregular pictures, not from a romantically centered position, but images that are tied to an invisible system of patterns. And Asian art was really a great model for me in this regard, because Chinese painting really places the painter within a harmonic system that he's really only a part of. And I think that's really what Pollock meant when he said that I am nature, that somehow he is himself inside this web of forces. And on the right is a computer image by a Japanese artist, Yamaguchi, from 1985, called A Theoretical Tree. And I have a real interest in computer visualization systems. I think it opens up a whole realm of thinking about how pictures are made and what a picture can be, and the complicated spaces that computers are now generating have, I think, vast implications on the way that we make all images, including paintings and drawings. Enough. I mean, I'm not interested in using a computer to generate images. What I'm interested in is somehow looking at things and filtering my impressions through my own sensibility and my own neural network in order to spit out painted images. Because I think that paintings are composed out of raw material, and somehow the manipulation of that raw material into mental pictures is an incredibly magical process. And it's something that's totally unique to painting and totally and full of enormous potential. And it really is the only place you can go to physically experience an image in that way. This is a painting that's the last painting in the show that's up at the Whitney. And I worked on it in a little bit of a different way, because I was working directly from drawings, which is something I never really permitted myself to do. And I think working from a drawing allowed me to think about the structure and color of the paintings in a new way. It really freed me up to use color more synthetically, and is now freeing me up to use lots of different kinds of materials in order to build and construct the images. And now I'm back to that group of drawings that I started with, which I'm developing this group now and turning them into paintings. And they're all 22 inches high and are done with a wide variety of materials in black and white, and charcoal and graphite, and different chalks and pastels. And I'm consciously trying to work in a tonal way so that I can develop this range of images and the spaces that are being created, so that when I take them and make paintings out of them, I can superimpose a whole other set of thinking on them in order to turn them into paintings. I think because there's this more physical, calligraphic approach to the way that the images are produced, they're also occupying the page in new ways. There's no longer that centered or floating image that I was using so much before, and I think that the images themselves are occupying the same space as the viewer is. Wittgenstein had said that sometimes the simplest explanation is a gesture, and I'm really interested in making painted gestures. And this is the last slide. That's it. Thank you.
Terry, that was fascinating, and I learned a lot. One of the things I wanted to ask you about was, I guess it can't be generalized about the whole 10 years.
Sure we can.
Because at the end you were saying the space changed, but I wondered how you would describe the space in the paintings of most of the decade. Because one is so conscious of the surface, and one isn't located in a space in any, obviously in any Renaissance painting sense.
Well, I think that the space that's in the paintings is really a mental space, and it's the mental space of the viewer, and it's something that's continually shifting. It's not about using a mimetic space that is a space of everyday reality. It's a space really that has to do with perceptual reality.
So that it could have a great deal of depth to it, but
yeah, hopefully.
It would be imaginary.
I want depth.
You used the word mimetic again, and I'm not sure I understood what you meant by the distinction between mimetic and representational.
The distinction is that when I say mimetic, I mean that there's a parallel equivalence, that rather than it being a stand-in or a mirror for something else, it exists as an isometric projection of the thing, that it's built in the same way as the thing it's referring to.
Is
that clear?
I'm thinking about it. I think that I know what you mean, but I'm not sure that it's clear.
It was the funniest thing I've said this evening.
I wondered if, thinking about other artists of your generation and so on, if it feels odd in 1992 to be making painting at all. And a great many artists are using other mediums.
Not to me.
Completely other question. It seems to me that when you went to ULAE, and then again when you went to work on the etchings with Alder Kromelank, it was a completely new experience. And I wonder just exactly how you go about making yourself learn something that's quite complex technically. I mean, what actually happened, say, when you went to Kromelank's studio in Paris and started to learn if you'd never made etchings before?
Well, I tend to invent projects that necessitate a very labor-intensive program. So when I went to Kromelank's, I wanted to do a portfolio of forms that I had already used in other mediums, so that at least was a constant. And I worked over a number of plates, so I would always be having something I could work on. And I just set up a situation where I needed to experiment with lots of different mark-making aspects that etching provided. But basically it's a high anxiety situation of doing it.
Well, having visited Crumble's studio, I thought it was a high anxiety situation just to be taken around and shown the place. I found myself
it's
very
just
awed
very
by it all. And
it's very daunting when I don't know anything about etching, and Aldo Crumlake knows everything about etching, and he asked me, well, what should we do now? So I actually didn't know what we should do now.
did he go about making you comfortable, or you then?
No, he didn't.
For those of you who haven't seen him, he looks a little bit like Samuel Beckett, doesn't he? Sort of scary. You also mentioned the word narrative, and I didn't quite know what you meant.
I shouldn't have said that.
Is that a way of ducking the question, or are you going to talk about what you meant by narrative?
I guess it's some vague notion I have about the picture's story-making potential, and my coming to terms with the fact that I really do like making pictures, and I like pictures that kind of tell a story. And the stories in the paintings, everyone can make up their own story about, but I think they have that potential, and I'm interested in developing them in that way. It's something that's really been squeezed out of painting, and I think that at this particular point, abstraction has very exciting possibilities for reintroducing those ideas about pictorial narrative.
Let's take the Arena Chapel or something by Giotto. I mean, that's a good pictorial.
Yeah, it's difficult because there's not an agreed upon text between the painter and the viewer. It's more about the pictures and how they might imply that there is something going on between the forms and the paintings. I mean, it's not about an agreed upon story.
So the good government, for example, would be a picture in which you felt that there was some.
I think they all
activity.
have that. That's how I think about them.
Does working in series, as you have, relate to this idea about narrative?
Yeah, it does.
No,
I think that this, the sequencing of the different pieces that are in any series, I tend to sequence them because of some idea about how one thing leads to another, and what might be going on from one drawing or painting or print to another.
I certainly wondered about that when I saw the 75 works on paper in the gallery, where they were all hung at the same height and around corners. One had an inevitable suggestion of a possibility of narrative. What, do you think of your paintings as abstract?
I think of them as representational when somebody asks me if they're abstract, and I think of them as being abstract when somebody asks me if they're representational.
Terry and I had a dress rehearsal at Princeton about a week ago, and I don't know there if I would have
Didn't
let
ask
you
me
get
that
away
there.
with that question, with that answer. Can you expand on that a little more seriously?
I think that one can't exist without the other. That they're inevitably wed together, and that the idea that an abstract painting doesn't refer to some idea about the world and some idea about how to represent the world is really a fiction, and that it's a question of degree and focus. The difference between abstraction and representation, and I think that they're both tools that can be used in painting now without those kinds of categories being applied to them.
Okay. Or I suppose another way to think about it would be to think about it, it's all a form of symbolist painting. Is that what you mean?
Okay. I mean,
you can say no.
well, yeah, it is. I think. I mean, but I think the world is a form of symbolist painting. I mean, I do think that there's a way that the world's a hieroglyph that we're all involved in deciphering, and that taking a look at the forms that exist in the world within the cultural convention of making a painting is a way to focus on that aspect about the world. That that the world, figuring out the meaning of things in the world by examining it visually.
We were talking a little bit before about your having read the book Chaos and having gotten interested in fractals, and I wondered if you would talk about that a little.
Well, I got interested in mostly because of that question about abstraction and representation, and I was attracted to the way that fractal geometries were able to produce images that looked as if they were representational, pictures of mountains or pictures of plants, and that they were really a consequence of very abstract mathematical thinking. And I think that there's a point now within computer science where it's very clear that those kinds of distinctions are very artificial and arbitrary, and that there is in fact some kind of underlying system that can help us, that can illustrate that underlying, the computers can illustrate that underlying system in a way to really help dissolve those distinctions. And things that are going on in chaos theory, I think there's a way that we're finding out that everybody's looking for a unifying principle with everything. I think the unifying principle is chaos.
There's some wonderful questions here.
Let's see some.
The first one says, a group from Pratt is here to cheer you on. Thanks for the inspiration. So, and I guess going forward from Pratt, the next question
What was the question?
How did you survive from 1971 to 1982, your first show?
Odd jobs.
Well, some of them were interesting odd jobs.
But they were all odd. So.
I guess the one I'm thinking about that was very interesting, it seems to me, was, didn't you help build Walter de Maria's lightning field?
I worked on it for a time.
And it was odd.
Yeah, it was odd.
With the exception of the yeast pieces, have you done other sculpture, and do you foresee yourself ever creating any sculpture?
Yeah, I do foresee it. I think my relationship to thinking about sculpture is what my relationship to thinking about prints was about 10 years ago, that it's something I wanted to do, but I couldn't quite get to it. And I knew that I never wanted to reproduce three-dimensionally some of the objects that were inhabiting the paintings two-dimensionally. So I tended not to do it. But now the work has evolved to a point where I think it would be helpful for me to work out some of the ideas in a sculptural way.
I think that's fascinating. The question continues, what material might you use in sculpture?
Oh, gosh, every material. I don't know. I mean,
You really don't know?
I'm really interested in using lots of materials.
Your black and white drawings seem to have a Japanese influence. Is that correct?
If you say so.
Duchampian response. When you paint the space around your forms, do you aim for the blankness of a page of botanical diagrams or the push and pull of abstract expressionism?
What was the other alternative to push and pull?
Blankness of a botanical.
I don't think I'm really aiming for these things, so I don't know. I'm trying to activate the space of the total surface. I don't know how else to say it.
Here's a question related to mine about representation versus mimicry. Is this the same as illusion versus process? And in the latter case, first, does it matter? And is there any post-process editing? I edited the question.
This is a complicated question. I don't see illusion being in opposition to process, although I don't see it. I think there was a time where illusion was something that was being pushed out of painting, and that's something I think everybody wants to get back into painting, or I think that's what I want to get back into painting. I'm interested in illusion and the kinds of illusions that are created through process, and any post-process editing. Yeah, I think that anything that's left in the painting is there because I let it be there, and it's all a process of editing. I mean, however much any image might be generated by, concentration, chance, or laziness. I mean, finally, it's a conscious decision to leave it in the picture, and what the picture looks like is what the picture means. So.
Do you think De Koopel's bubble paintings are a spoof of your work or an admiring investigation of your work?
I haven't seen them, but they're probably both.
How do you feel about the almost anti-painting attitude that seems to be prevalent today?
I feel great about it, really. No, I think this ties into what your question before about, how does it feel like making paintings? And I think that it's difficult to make interesting paintings, and it becomes increasingly difficult to make interesting paintings. And that, coupled with the fact that more and more very bright young people choose not to make paintings, has made the situation difficult for people to look at paintings now. But I think that while that's true, it's also true that I think it's a really exciting time to be making pictures and making paintings, and I don't think the kind of literalist focus on making objects can ever supplant the illusionistic pictorial space and imaginative space that paintings can offer.
That seems a good note to end on, I think. Thank you very much, Judd.
Thanks for listening. For more information on the 92nd Street Y, New York, and all of our programs, please visit us at 92ny.org.